Good evening. It's an honor for me to be here tonight in such a company of influencers and leaders who share the same passion, that of balancing businesses. My name is Florence Hamilton, and I'm the founder of the INSEAD Alumni Balance in Business Initiative. We are a group of 100% volunteer-led, whose mission is to engage and to inspire leaders of today and tomorrow as to why balance in business matters, as to how it can be implemented, and to recognize the value it can create. We start off by focusing on gender. Why gender? If we look at the population at large, it's pretty much 50-50, men and women. If we look at the statistics of people leaving universities, it's approximately 60% female. If we look at the Fortune 500, or if we look at the FTSEs, what do we see? It's a very different picture. Why aren't we looking at the entire pool of talent? Why aren't we ensuring that the conditions within our organizations are such that will enable each and every one to succeed? The Balance in Business Initiative is on 3 different pillars. The first pillar is impact mentoring, and that is a career progression for women, and is the fastest route to add to the numbers at the top, as well as to create role models, which is essential. We feel it's impact one at a time. We've been going since 2018. We've had so far 250 women going through our program. A second pillar is partnership and collaboration. And we invite all of you in this room to join us. If you look around the room, they'll have some with little funny squares saying balance in business, BIB. And we are here to talk to you and see how you too can join us in making a more balanced world. The third pillar is awareness and engagement. And by fostering an active community of INSEADers, their network, and leaders across sectors who are passionate about balancing business, we will be stronger, more impact, a different culture. What needs to happen is we need to think about the templates that we use today. Are they really the right template? Is it time to change the template? Tonight, we ask you all to exchange your experiences with us. We have an incredible panel here who will share their experiences on why balance in business matters, what is going on in the world today, how to implement it, and more importantly, when. So I will have great pleasure in introducing you to Milka Kramer, who is country manager for Pinterest, England and Ireland. Suki Sandhu, OBE, you can smile so we know who you are, because otherwise I can't say number 1, number 2, number 3, so please smile when I say your names. Who is founder and CEO of Audeliss. It's an executive firm who specializes in diversity, as well as involve the Inclusion People, a consultancy firm driving diversity and inclusion. Loren Shuster, a DNR. He is Chief People Officer and Head Corporate Affairs at Lego. I also mentioned he is a mentor on our program. Much appreciated. Joelle Warren, MBE, founding partner at Warren Partners, and also contributed to the Hampton-Alexander Reviews. Warren Partners is an executive search firm, or headhunting firm, shall we say. In addition to it, we have the pleasure to have 2 people present here who were speakers in our previous series. of Helen Pitcher, who was a speaker at our board's perspective. Helen Pitcher, CEO, Ned, and everybody I think in this room probably knows her. And Tiger Chagaran, who is the CEO of Genpact, speaker on our CEO series, and is a great supporter and donor to our Balance in Business initiative. And without further ado, I will pass it to Mark Spelman, who is our moderator, and we have great pleasure because he is many things, amongst them a member of the Executive Committee of the World Economic Forum, and for many years prior to that was MD at Accenture.
Thank you very much, Florence, and a very warm welcome to the panel, a very warm welcome to you. We've got an audience here in London, and we're also live streaming. So to those of you who are watching us on the live stream, a very warm welcome. I hope that today is actually going to be about you doing something. And what I mean by that is that the real purpose behind tonight's discussion is not just to give you insights, not just to give you examples, but what we really want you to do is to do something with those insights and those examples. So the key message from tonight is take something away, but please apply it, whether that's with your organisation, whether that's in your particular function, whether it's in your role, whether it's as a leader. But the key thing is find one or two things from tonight and take them away and apply them. So that's your task, and my job is to try and engage the panel here and have a little bit of a discussion around balance in business and the talent perspective. And we're going to try and think about why does it matter, what's going on at the moment, how can we make a difference, and then when, the timing issue. But I'm going to start, Loren, with you. So Lego Group.
Thank you.
20,000 people on the planet, all right? Lego Group seems to keep on coming up over the last decade, always at the top of the reputational sort of leagues. And what I'm really interested to know is, what is it about balance in business and talent that has helped you to be consistently one of the top performers?
Yep. Well, first of all, it's good to be here. This is my first in-person event, so I'd be lying if I didn't say it's a little bit intimidating post being isolated for a very long time. But it's really good to be here and with the other panelists as well. So I think the first thing to say is, maybe I'll start at a high level of abstraction. I mean, this topic, if we frame it as diversity and inclusion, and of course balance in business is focused on gender, is one of the defining issues of our time. It's right up there with sustainability. It's right up there with digitalization. And there's not a single business or organization on earth that should not be paying attention to all three of those critical topics. But if we focus on balance in business and within the context of the Lego Group, we consider ourselves a purposeful organization. And I think we'll probably speak to the criticality of purpose for attracting and retaining talent. I think there's a lot of nods, and there's a lot of hyperbole around it as well, but we believe that we are congruent in terms of having a purposeful mission to inspire and develop the children of tomorrow. Children includes children of all kinds, male, female, any other way in which children and or their parents want to identify themselves. And so it's easy to connect with that purpose. And then to what extent do we authentically live that in the organization? And to some extent, we only partially authentically represent it. Because if we truly want to reach all children with our learning through play experiences and help them develop their creativity and their 21st century skills, then our organization from top to bottom, all the talent needs to better reflect the communities in which we operate and the consumers and shoppers in which we're offering our value proposition to.
So let me just ask you, if you take that and you look forward at your job for the next 3 years, to keep you at the top of your game, what are you really going to be focusing on in the next 3 years to really help you sort of drive that balance going forward?
Well, ultimately, we're looking for, if you talk about gender in the classic sense, which also needs to be pointed out, then we're looking at 50-50 representation across all levels of the organization, across all functions in the organization. And that's what we're working towards. And I guess through the discussion, we'll get to a number of interventions that we have been deploying. And maybe the last thing I'll say, this is one of the areas which I actually don't believe, based on my experience, is an area that few activities and do them well. I think this is an area, whether it's gender or the wider D&I, that needs a large number of activities, some big, some small, happening simultaneously to make a difference.
So I want you to give the audience the one intervention that you think is most important in Lego Group going forward now, because I want that logged in everybody's minds right up front. So what would be the one intervention?
I think one of them, if we're talking about, and then this is an experienced group of people, is what we call a Senior Women in Leadership Sponsorship Program.
Okay.
And there's 7 executive leadership team members, and we sponsor. We actually work with Herminia Ibarra from INSEAD. Some of you may know her. And she's helped design this program with us. And the executive leadership team sponsors VP plus women on their journey. And,
So just for everybody, I'm just trying to make sure you log these various points. I want to make sure that we sort of are clear about mentoring, sponsorship, and role modeling. I think they're all important. And we'll come back and talk about that a bit more. But that's a really helpful sort of insight to kick us off. Milka, I'm going to come to you. So Pinterest is a very different sort of organisation, a bit smaller. It's got sort of 2,200. It seems that employees are at the heart of your mission statement. You might want to sort of tell people what is your mission statement. But give me, again, an insight in terms of how do you relate purpose, mission with this balance in business agenda?
Yeah, so let's start. So just for context, I'm currently at Pinterest, but I spent 11 years at Microsoft, which is another big tech company that's been very focused on diversity and inclusion. And as I talk today, I'll talk from my own personal perspective. At Pinterest, our mission is to help people create the life they love. And we really are we call ourselves the positive place in the internet. We're trying to build a kinder, more positive internet. And in order to do that, to lead the way in that, we really have to make sure that we have a very inclusive workforce. And that goes across all dimensions of diversity. I know today we're focusing on gender, but there is a lot more diversity that we think about, and that has to be taken into consideration. I think what sits in the core of this is actually, one of our core priorities is building an inspired culture. That's literally what it is. And this is, every leader in the organization thinks about this in a very, very meaningful way. I mean, and I can give one example, but I sit with my leadership team, and we have a diversity discussion quite regularly. We literally would look at the composition of our team at a broader level, and then an individual team level, and we'll talk about what is the diversity we need to bring in the organization. So it's really being very, very thoughtful about, and there's many elements there which we can go through later, but how we hire, how do we attract, how we hire equitably through an equitable recruitment process, how do we, when women or other members of underrepresented minorities come in, how do we make sure they're successful, etc. The way I think about an organization and a team, it's like a living organism, and that's something that changes all the time. And so you really have to be thinking about this constantly. This isn't something that you do and then you stop. It's a continuous priority and continuous focus. And again, one of the questions I sometimes get asked is, how do you know who the right person for the job is? And I'll give a bit of a silly example. So I'm not really very good in cars, but I use a car example. Is maybe the best engine in the world is the BMW engine. I don't know if it is, again, excuse me. But if I'm looking for the engine of a Mercedes, I need to find the engine for the Mercedes. And that's how I think about it. It's really we're building something that has to continue to evolve and change going forward.
So if I was sitting in your organisation in one of your sort of management meetings, give me a little bit more of a flavour of how would you check the pulse of what's going on?
So first, we have a very regular check-in with our employees. So they tell us we have regular, feedback sessions. We have also different employee resource groups that are focused on different. So we have a women's group in EMEA. We have a black board. We have a group that's focused on LGBT. So again, and similarly to what you're doing with senior women, we have senior leaders that sponsor those groups. And we have these discussions very regular. Like I can tell you on a EMEA leadership level, we discuss this every month. When I sit with my management team and we talk about what's going on in our team, we literally look at the team and go, here's the composition of your team. You need more women, men. How do you think about that? What's the skill set you need? What's the background you need? So so in that way we kind of scope what is the talent we need to find in the market.
For both of you, I'm interested in the people who come and say, yeah, we get all of that, but it's not possible in our organisation or in our sector. What would you say to them?
I think this is the difference between having the why in general, or why diversity, and why in the particular. And I think sometimes this is where it breaks. It's like, I think why in the general, we all, every leader will say, yes, I believe in diversity. But this is where actions speak louder than the words. Because what you have to do with diversity is, it takes time. Diversity slows a hiring process down. It makes, then if you move from diversity to inclusion, a diverse team, you have to work quite a lot on inclusion. It's not so straightforward how you lead such a team, how you make it work with each other. And that time commitment that you have to make is really important. The way I think about it is, if you're looking for imagine it of a hard skill, like you're looking for a data scientist or somebody with an experience in AI, and you know what you're looking for, you will take the time to go and find it in the market. So why wouldn't you do the same thing with diversity? Yes, it slows us down in the short term, but it makes us better and faster and more successful in the long run.
Very good.
But I will put it simply, there's simply no way that any organization operating in most markets on Earth can attract and retain the best talent without a clear articulation of a philosophy and an approach towards a diverse and inclusive workplace.
Very good. Suki, I'm going to, go on.
But the question was, what do you say to people that aren't getting on board with diversity and inclusion? I feel we're being a little bit democratic here. And actually, I think it gets to a point where the business case is so well rehearsed, and we've heard some really great examples of why it's important, that the research is there, whether you want to believe it or not. I think what becomes more important, I think, nowadays is it's the right thing to do.
Yep.
I'm trying to get that back up as the priority. Forget about productivity, creativity, innovation, whatever all the research tells you. Let's go back to it's the right thing to do, particularly as we're living through this global pandemic where everyone is working remotely, or it's now hybrid with this event that we have today. What extra steps are we taking to make sure those people are at home? How are they feeling safe and secure in their work environment? And if you think of, say, for instance, the LGBT plus community, coming to the office may have been their safe space. So actually they're at home now where they might not feel comfortable being themselves. We have to go the extra mile to try and support them. And from a business case perspective, if the Lego Group and Pinterest aren't doing it, people don't even have to leave their own homes to find a new job anymore. They can literally do it all from the comfort of their lounge or bedroom. So that's kind of the opportunity cost of not doing it, is you're going to lose talent ultimately.
Right, so I've heard you say on a number of occasions, we need punchy targets. So is punchy targets the way that we actually sort of need to progress? And if you believe what you just said, which is this is a principle at sort of the top end, is punchy targets the way to sort of push the organisation forward?
I'm curious what a punchy target is.
Well, it's one solution. So I think Loren said it perfectly earlier, like diversity and inclusion is so complex because there isn't a silver bullet to solve all the problems. And diversity is a very wide range of demographics, like we're talking about gender today. But then when you think about gender, what about the intersections of gender? Sure. Black women, Asian women, trans women, bi women. You've got to remember the last 10 to 15 years, the critique of executive women diversity is it's focused largely on middle and upper class white women. And actually, I think a lot of women of colour have been left behind. But then what Black Lives Matter and the protests of last summer did, it was an awakening moment for everyone in the world to actually realise that we all need to do more to support the black community. Even me as a brown person recognising that I need to step up and do more as an ally or as a sponsor, as you mentioned earlier. Yeah. But I think punchy targets for me are when the CEO or the chair, whether it's board targets or exec targets, are they creating targets? Like when it comes to gender, why isn't it 50%? So even the 30% club, I was like, why did you go for 30%? half the population are women, so it should be 50-50. But then I think the punchiness is what I mean in terms of holding yourself accountable. So if you're going to set those targets, have you communicated those externally? How are you holding yourself accountable to know that actually in a year's time, where's that transparency about the actions you've taken to achieve those targets? So in Audeliss and Involve, we published an open letter in the Sunday Times last summer at the peak of the BLM protest, where we now have over 80 CEOs that have signed it who represent over 1 million employees in the UK. And they've all set targets at every level in the organisation around race and black representation. And the key thing is they have to then publish an annual report talking about what is it they've actually done to tackle it.
So I think that's an important takeaway, because I want to link the punchy targets with the accountability.
Yeah,
because I think that in so many walks of life going forward, that is going to be the two things going together. So that's really good. Joelle, I'm interested in what you're picking up at the moment around some of the trends. There's been a lot of focus around particularly the boardroom. Have we been making progress particularly with women in the boardroom? What's your sense at the moment? And again, what do you sort of crystallise out as the things that need to be sort of where we need to be focusing in terms of making progress or more progress going forward?
So, yes, there has been progress in the boardroom. I mean, since 2011, the Davis report, Hampton-Alexander across the FTSE 350 hit their 33% target for women in boards. So great, let's celebrate that. But actually, when you look at, they'd also set some targets around women in exec committee and Exco -2, and they didn't hit that target. And then you look at things like the number of women in CEO positions, and particularly the number of women in that sort of chair, SID, CEO, CFO, those sort of control leadership roles, and they're not there. I suppose what I'd like to be seeing, Hampton-Alexander's finished, and it shows that targets can work without quotas. But there are organisations that are setting that 50% target, which I think is absolutely essential, and similar targets around ethnicity. So within Warren Partners, we've set 50% for gender, 14% for ethnicity, because that's the UK figure, and we're hitting those. But you look at the UK, the FTSE 250 are the published figures, they're not hitting 33% appointments across the piece, and so it'll drift backwards if it doesn't have those punchy targets, that focus.
And what do you think we need to do to sort of stop the drift just sort of taking place?
I think there's a cultural thing that absolutely every decision that is made, whether it be about recruitment, around training, around reward, around opportunities for progression, I think you've always got to be thinking of diversity and are we opening up the talent pool enough? Because 50% of women are coming in as graduates or at any level, they're not getting through. So you've got to be looking at targets at every level and opportunities at every level.
And Mark, you wanted concrete suggestions to build on this point, and I think another activity, another intervention that we deployed that I think had significant impact, and it was actually a bit of a debate in the executive team, so it took a while to negotiate the outcome, was that all recruitments need to be open. We were flowing talent around the organization, and leaders at various levels were making decisions that this person's going to take that role because it's important for their development. But in a system that is dominated by a single gender, and often, or at least in our case, I could discuss, white Caucasian male, there's inherent bias. So unless you break down those traditional ways of working, and it's same with the promotion process, and we've had to open up everything, and the only way you get an exception to flow of talent in the Lego group now is it has to go all the way up to the executive leadership team. Not that we want to control and police everything, but is to force every layer of the organization to discuss, is this really so important, this individual who is obviously not female, or not a person of color or one of the other underrepresented groups in the organization. Is this something that we want to push all the way up to the top, or do we want to run an open and fair process?
And I want to just explore with the panel a little bit about sort of this problem about you get a lot of people at the top end who say all the right things, but the real issue is how do you get the mid-tiers to actually buy into what you're trying to achieve? Milky, you're smiling at me. So tell me, how do you get the mid-tiers to buy into what Loren's just described?
Well, I think it started with this. I think you have to hold accountability at a system level. So how do you build the systems and processes in place that you make sure that you eliminate bias as much as possible? And this can be anything from, as you said, recruitment, promotion, how do you move talent around? So there's a lot of things that you can do from a systematic perspective. And again, I can share maybe one of the things, but recruitment, when we now do recruitment, is we don't look at a pipeline unless the pipeline is diverse. So our recruitment team has to go and find that pipeline. Then there is a lot of thought that goes into, is the process equitable, not equal, but equitable for the people that are going to go through the process? And again, who is on the interview panel? Is the panel diverse? Every single panelist is assessing one thing and one thing only. Nobody's assessing everything. It's what, and then how do you do the debrief? So there is, and again, that basically makes it all long. But for me, where it stands for is individual accountability. And I personally believe that every leader, every manager in the organization, building effective teams is the #1 priority. And that comes into their assessment. So, 70% of an employee's experience of an organization comes to their direct manager. So this is where we need to make sure this is done right. But it starts with accountability. As I said earlier, diversity is slow. So, if a manager is faced with a decision of, do I hire quickly, or do I take the time and go for the diverse candidate? It's my responsibility to hold them accountable, to go, you're gonna, if that's what we agreed you're gonna do, that's what you're gonna do. But it takes effort and it takes time.
Very good. Suki, are you sort of, when you do, you're advising a company or you're working with a company on recruiting and attracting sort of diverse talent, what do you look for in that client in terms of understanding whether that company has really understood the I&D agenda?
I think it's that flexibility when you're discussing the brief about what they might need. Because I think it's, let's say someone needs to hire a board director for the board, and like this year alone, for instance, I think we've appointed 10 racially diverse NEDs onto 9 FTSE boards. So the Parker Review, which has set the target for race for boards, has been pretty weak. But I think even this year alone, we've made a big dent on those targets. And if I think of all those clients and why they've done it, they have taken a much more purposeful and proactive approach to find someone. And for them, actually, a lot of them, their unicorn was a racially diverse woman, because they wanted to maintain the Hampton-Alexander tick the box of gender, but also wanted to hit the Parker Review target.
Would she also be in tech with a strong ESG credentials?
Yeah, but literally trying to get these chairs or CEOs to think differently, that is the biggest shift we need to make in mindset. Because when you talked about the middle being squeezed and what they need to do, they're looking up to the culture carriers in the organisation who are the C-suite, who are the board, to look like what are they supposed to do? Are they equipping them with the skills, tools, the education that they need to actually tackle diversity and inclusion? Because it is really complex when you think about different demographics. What kind of gender inclusion training are they getting? What kind of race inclusion training are they getting? Where are they building empathetic relationships? You talked about role models. Role models are central for storytelling and building empathy. Like, we publish these role model lists with Yahoo Finance each year across different demographics, and we do it because we're trying to challenge stereotypes about where people expect those communities to be. So with women or with race or with LGBT+, we want to show that actually you can be successful despite your diversity, and also celebrating the allies for those communities. So men helping women, straight leaders helping LGBT+, and white leaders helping racially diverse communities. That's just as important as the diverse communities themselves.
But remember, we're not talking about the middle. We're talking about the part of the middle that has been previously privileged and has expectations, right? I mean, the part of the middle that is representing underrepresented communities does not need to be convinced of the criticality of this agenda, nor does a significant portion of the previous privileged class So I think it's, and I think that's a very nuanced engagement, because while the usual somewhat hyperbolic story goes that, well, if the company is more focused on D&I, it will be more successful, there'll be more opportunities for everyone. And there's some truth to that in some circumstances. But the reality is also that competition for each role is now relatively increased, because we're inviting, as we should, more people into the process that weren't there in the past. And I think part of bringing the middle along is having, is treating them like adults and having very open and honest discussions.
But I do think it takes quite a bold and brave CEO to really push the agenda. Yep. So when I think about the CEOs and chairs we work with, or even when we're going in a pitching process, like you invite a number of firms to go and pitch to the chair or CEO to recruit a board seat. As soon as you go in, and it's a virtual room now because we don't do in-person meetings that often anymore, and as soon as you hear the chairman or CEO say, well, Suki, you want the best person for the job. And I'm like, we're never going to get this. They're not going to choose us. They're going to go with a traditional firm, because I'm like, well, we want you to get the best person for the job. We just want you to have more people to choose from. Because there is this huge misconception that when you're doing diversity hiring, whether it's gender, race, LGBT+, wherever it might be, there's this misconception that you're compromising on quality, which is not true. Like, diversity hiring is about widening the gate, not lowering the bar. Mm-hmm. And that's the message that we're always trying to send to chairs and CEOs, to get them to think more broadly about where they're finding talent.
So, go on, Joelle.
The other thing we hear is, and we want them to fit. And that's a word that I'm constantly challenging on, because it's not always comfortable. And so those chairs who are trying to lead this board in the same way they did a homogenous board where everybody just sat and nodded and agreed with everyone else, will find this very uncomfortable. And so these hires will not necessarily fit in that traditional way. So,
and we have to remember that there is a spectrum of chairmen and CEOs out there. There are some on this end that are, I mean, I can only describe them as dinosaurs. They're going to be extinct soon. They'll roll off their tenure, a new chair will take over, a new CEO will be there. Then you've got this spectrum where they're incredibly progressive, like a David Roberts, the chair of Tesco. There's a number of chairs on that side. It's in the middle where a lot of them want to do something, but they just don't know how. Right. They want to take the action, they just don't know what they're supposed to do to hire a woman.
So I'm going to challenge the headhunting brigade now. So I'm going to come back in a moment to Loren and Milka on the middle management, because I'm not sure we quite cracked that. Right. So it seems to me that one of the problems that we have with the diverse path is, yes, we all agreed that we want more diverse candidates. The real problem is the selection criteria and the fact that lots of organisations are not comfortable with unusual career paths. Mm-hmm. How do you get, and I'll go, Joelle, maybe you kick off with this one, how do we get organisations to accept that as part of evaluating a broader set of candidates, you might need to look at unusual career paths and not the classic ways and routes that people have traditionally used to get to the top? So how are you approaching that from a headhunting point of view? And then maybe you can help us also think about what does that mean from a company point of view? Because it seems to me that one of the ways that we break this going forward is there has to be more acceptance of different career paths to going forward. Yeah. So what's the secret to moving that forward?
So concentrating on skills, not on where they've gained them. So we're constantly going back to what are the criteria, what are you looking for? So I remember an example where one of my FTSE 250 clients was looking for a CEO, and they said, and we'd really like to appoint a woman. And so we start going through the criteria, and they had to have, this person had to have already been on the exco of a FTSE 350. So I said, okay, so you've shrunk and then they have to have been within the consumer sector. So we've shrunk it even more. So I said, okay, so basically there are 3 women who could do this job. It's these 3 women, and I don't think any of them are going to want it.
Or I would have just told them to do it themselves.
Well,
why pay me all that money when you can do it yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, but we had to push back.
Yeah.
So we had to say, that is not going to happen. And if you really want a woman, then you've got to broaden it, and we'll look outside the FTSE 350. We might even, heaven forbid, look outside the quoted sector. We're doing something very similar on race at the moment.
I think there are two issues. So the first thing is around the supply of talent. What talent are we sourcing to get in front of the chair or the CEO to hire? Yep. That's the first thing.
Yep.
And that's around, like you said, widening the brief. What kind of diversity networks are you going to? Obviously, we've been doing diversity search for over 10 years. We have a database of 10 years of diverse talent that we access. But then that's just one thing, the supply of talent. The other thing is the process itself. How inclusive is the hiring process? And what that basically means is, have we identified who the key stakeholders are? Are the stakeholders really aware of what the brief is that we're looking for? Have we then assessed the candidates alongside that brief? So when you're getting feedback from stakeholders saying, well, she's not a cultural fit, or she didn't demonstrate matrix management. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, and normally is a Mr. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but that wasn't a criteria. But if there is, we should be asking the other shortlist on that experience as well. Let's present the data points and let's make sure it's fair. So it's trying to mitigate bias in a process so you can get to a fair appointment. And if that means the straight white guy gets the job, then great, fantastic, he's the best person for the job. But the process itself has to evolve to make sure that we're mitigating bias.
Which comes back a little bit to what Milka was saying, which is having a more systematic approach to the way that you sort of think through the end-to-end recruitment process. I'm interested in the corporate view here. So if you look at unusual and exceptional appointments that you've made internally within Lego Group or Pinterest, how has that happened? How can you make it happen on a more regular basis? What about Lego?
Well, first of all, I think it's easier to make those choices not at the executive leadership team level. Yeah. So I think we should acknowledge that. It does get tricky if you want to hire someone with deep expertise, functional domain, industry domain. So I think it's important to go to two levels down and make those choices at that level. And at least what we're trying to do is also to provide rotation experiences within the organization, so that in a 5-year horizon, in this case we're talking about women, that those women leaders from middle management making their way up to executive, that they would have gathered a broader set of experiences within the Lego Group.
Right, hold on a sec. Rotation, key point. I just want to emphasize that one. Yeah. But one of the problems with rotation is that when you find a very good person, you want to keep them, and you don't tend to let them rotate. So how do you avoid that problem with rotating really good people who you see as potential sort of top execs going forward?
I think that's been less of an issue. We have certain, I don't think it's in a policy per se, but we have agreed principles that someone should be in the role for at least 2 years, and there's a commitment to do this, and we track it as well.
And Milka, how are you sort of helping the next sort of generation, the people just sort of 2 levels below the executive team to sort of progress? What are you doing in your organisation to promote that?
I mean, this is one thing we didn't talk about, I feel enough, which is, after you've, which is not easy, you source the talent, you run an equitable process, and you hire people, is how do you make sure you give those people all the resources to make this successful? Because it's one thing putting people in, but this is where equity comes in versus equality again. I think there's such a difference, and I don't think we talk enough about equities, the different backgrounds and different experiences that people have. How are you supporting them? Because when I look across my organization now, we've taken a risk on quite a lot of people, and we know they're coming from a different background. We have to make sure that we support them in the right way to get them to where they need to be. And I'll share here my own personal experience, which is, so I've been a mentee on the program here twice, and it's been absolutely instrumental with how I came into this role that I am. And when I first did the program, I was working with my mentors on what do I want to do next and the help I've had. And then last year when I took this job, I had 2 mentors through the program. Carol is here; she was one of them. I wouldn't be, this year wouldn't have gone for me as well as it did if I didn't have the support of people. And this is just one example of and so we're very lucky to have this. But I think that's something that companies and leaders need to think about is how do you support diverse talent of all sorts, not just women, to be successful in the roles they're in. So that's something that I think about a lot. And this has, as I said, it's mentorship, sponsorship, training in some cases. Also be aware of, where people are coming from and what are some of the gaps you need to bridge and how do you do that. People learn on the job, shadowing others, formal training. So there's a lot of things, but that also requires thought and resource behind it.
Accountability seems to be a key word. How do you make your managers accountable for the successful, if you like, induction and performance of new joiners?
Again, even before somebody joins, we need to make sure that they're coming in with a well-built support plan of how they're coming and what they're going to be successful. Then we'll look at it when we evaluate people, we do quite regular check-ins on how people are doing. Like there's different ways of how you do this. You look at data, there's ways to remove the bias from the process. Again, it's a very, very long process. But we need to make sure that we have, especially for diverse talent, we need to make sure that we have regular conversations around the progress, how they're doing, what help they need. And that's something that the managers and the company, have to be accountable for.
Very good. I want to just encourage you. We're going to take some questions, and certainly if those of you on the live stream, if you want to put a question to the panel, then very happy for you to feed it in, and we'll try and sort of pick up. I'm going to go to Helen Pitcher because Helen is well now known for the work she does with boards. So Helen, I'm interested in any reaction you've got as a chairperson to the sorts of comments that we've been talking about. One thing we haven't talked about is how you use board committees, like, for example, nominations committees, to help with sort of promoting better balance in business. Yeah. Any observations on what you've heard and how, again, we can move things forward using subcommittees?
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to focus on, particularly since committees, until relatively recently, had much narrower remits around this. So if you talk about nominations committee, it looked at CEO, CFO, CRO, if you were in a regulated area. It didn't look at the sustainability issue and the pipeline. So, and I'll come back to that sustainability issue in a minute. Listening to everybody here, I agree with all the points that have been made. Milka has just made a really good point, which is about risk and taking risks with people and then supporting them through that. I was very lucky in my career. I was a divisional board director at 27 and a half, that half mattered at the time, in Grand Metropolitan, and I was petrified that people would find out I didn't know what I was doing, because I thought I didn't. But I had a hugely supportive mentor and boss who basically was prepared to share the risk with me and to support me through it. So I think that's hugely important. So risk is one element. Having all of the right processes and practices in place is hugely important too, and then holding the executive to account around that. I'm sure most of us have seen the 9-box matrix over the years where, people are ready now, ready in 2 years, and guess what? They never get the roles. So, that is all outmoded, and we need to think differently and much more broadly. But if we don't, in organisations and as boards, encourage the right culture within the organisation and hold the executive to account on that, people will vote with their feet. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge issue. Now, one of the positives I hope will come out of the pandemic, which is a flip side at the moment, because whenever we have an issue around organisational performance, and by that I mean financial performance and stock market and so on, proportionately more women are made redundant than men. And that's been going on for 20, 25 years, to my certain knowledge. I think now that we've got a talent shortage, it will encourage people, and already is encouraging people, to look more broadly. But if we haven't looked at the culture, then those people will not stay. And this happened when we had the first Davis report, and Mervyn stood up there and he said, any chairman who says they can't do this should resign now. And that put the fear of God into a few people. And so they went out and did recruit diverse talent, that came from very different backgrounds, but then didn't support that integration into the board. And they left, and those chairmen said, knew it wouldn't work. And so it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we do have to avoid against all of that. And we do have to take a look, coming back to your question about committees, about just how clear the committees are in terms of what is it we want in the organisation? What is it we need? We've talked for donkey's years about being reflective of our client base, and then guess what? We don't do it. So how do we make sure that happens? Where it sits, I don't much mind whether it's in nominations committee, remuneration committee, which should also be about retention of talent. So there's an argument that it goes there. Or indeed now with the new ESG committee, does it fall there? Because ESG is looking at diversity and inclusion. So it really falls to the chairman to have a very clear perspective, to be prepared to take risk. Suki has done some recruitment for us on one of our boards, and we had an excellent diverse candidate. And, you know, he's a gentleman of colour. He has fitted in very well. But if you'd looked around our table until then, we were all of a similar age, all white, all, you know, relatively well off because of the career paths we've had. So, you know, we took that risk in inverted commas, which hasn't turned out to be a risk at all. So it does come back to something Suki was saying about your spectrum of chairmen. And when I'm doing board evaluations, I really do see the spectrum, but what I'm getting now is more people saying our board is dysfunctional right now because we're not getting the richness of the debate and the richness of thought from around the table because the chairman's dominating. And at that point, I'll stop dominating and hand back.
Lovely. Thanks very much indeed. So, Joelle, I was going to go to you. In terms of the how-to, so if we buy all the things that Helen's been saying there, how do you sort of see companies potentially sort of moving this sort of board appointment process forward? Is the sort of leveraging the REMCOs, the NOMCOs, the ESG committees, is that a useful sort of tool? If you were a NED listening to this, would you be saying, okay, you need to be having a boardroom discussion around what it is that you're doing to make sure this agenda is more on at the top table of the board?
So I think some of our more progressive clients in this area are doing a few things. So they are making sure that they are all understanding the D&I space. They're getting trained on on unconscious bias. They're thinking. They're setting targets for us as headhunters, which I think is absolutely essential. But they're also a point that that Milka made. They're also prepared to allow us more time to find those people. We've got one or two clients who are also starting to build up talent pools themselves with our help of more diverse talent that they will nurture. One particular client is actually holding bi-monthly teach-ins on what is the role of a NED for people who might be NEDs 2-3 years in the future. So, and they're allowing them access to their NEDs. They're putting them in live scenarios completely altruistically. I mean, hopefully it'll reflect well on them, but it's just building up that talent pool. And I think you said earlier about mentoring and sponsorship, but that's what it is in real life, isn't it? And that's an investment of time, of money, and something for society.
Yeah. And Loren, picking up on the other point about risk-taking, how good is the performance management systems at really, if you like, allowing what I would, the positive side of risk-taking is experimentation. So how do you allow experimentation and potential risk-taking to take place, and how do you accommodate that in performance management?
Yeah, we could open a whole discussion on performance management. I think classic performance management is like the 3x3 matrix, by the way we got rid of. The first thing I did as CHRO, even though I had no HR experience before I took this role, which is maybe why I got rid of it. But I think they're completely outdated. The notion that an individual can be isolated and their performance evaluated outside of understanding the context, the team that they're operating in is, I think, outdated. So that's just a comment there. And at least we've moved, and I believe much more in shared targets, shared accountability, because in very few businesses is one person doing anything in isolation of any other today. Businesses are too complex. So I think within that system, the risk, as you call it, we don't look at it that way, but giving people the opportunity is within some type of team system, whether that's the formal team, the informal team, and we try and create the cultural context for that to happen. So we have a particular approach to leadership. We call it's the leadership playground, which is very unique to the Lego group, obviously that metaphor. And the essence of that is that leadership is for everyone, regardless of whether you're a people leader, because that's also quite outdated. In some cases, the line manager is closest to the subordinate. In others, if you're in a digitally led organization, product managers are leading product teams, and they have greater proximity. So it's creating the context for systemic shared accountability that I think takes the discussion away from are we taking a risk or not, but okay, we need a diverse team, the context is complex, the problem is complex, we need to solve it together and create some artifacts to enable that, i.e. our leadership model.
So in that construct, how do you identify your really top performers, so the ones who've got real sort of future potential over the course of the next 5 years?
Through multiple data points. So everything from 360s, we still have formal reviews, but there's multiple data points, they're much more frequent. There's coaching, mentoring relationship, there's upward feedback surveys, so it's looking at multiple data points rather than isolating it to one evaluation by one person at one point in time.
And Milka, what are you doing around this issue about how do you both sort of identify high potential, work in teams, sort of promote and stretch people going forward? What's the sort of philosophy that you're using to approach that?
I mean, again, there's a systematic processes that are in place that are, they're very long, again, to remove bias at every level of it. But I don't want to go into that, actually. Where I wanted to spend one of the things I've been thinking a lot about and I've observed is the opportunity that a person has to make an impact. Because it can be very easily overlooked. And there was a great article in Harvard Business Review, actually 2 weeks ago, which is the women do the work that's needed versus the work that's valued. And that is a massive difference. And I've seen this as I interview. I recently hired a senior person for my team, and I interviewed quite a lot of women. I ended up hiring throughout, even though I felt the process was equitable, I ended up hiring a man. But one of the things that I was seeing with the women was all the examples they were giving, even at that senior level, were like a lot of, women tend to do so many things, but not the things that the company values. And that sometimes I think comes from bias within the organization. So again, one of the things I think a lot about is when we have a big project, when we have something big, who takes it? Is it the person who raises their hand, which very often will be a man? Or do we go and give this opportunity to a woman? So I think that's one thing that I think is really important to think about, needed versus valued. I think the second thing is, and again, we mentioned this a couple of times, women tend to be over-mentored and under-sponsored. So again, it's one thing that I will spend some time thinking about is like, who is sponsoring the high potential female talent? How do we make sure we build individual plans to make sure that they take advantage? And again, the final thing I want to say is there are pivotal moments in everybody's career, whether that's man or woman, that's becoming a manager for the first time, becoming a mid-level leader. Very often for women, that coincides with big life changes, like starting a family. And again, that requires a lot of thought from an organization. How do you support your future leaders in those pivotal moments of time? So, which is another big conversation. But I think these are things that have to be thought through and implemented at an organizational systemic level in order to allow for that.
So I'm interested in getting all of your views on sponsors as opposed to mentors, because I think we talk a lot about the mentors. What is, if you like, the characteristics of a good sponsor in your mind?
Somebody who thinks about your career And by the way, sponsor can be within a company or outside the company. It doesn't have to be within the company.
Yeah.
But somebody who who believes in you, thinks about your career, and will give you and push you when an opportunity comes up. So again, I'll share a personal example, but right now I'll have, sometimes I'll have recruiters reach out to me and I'll say, I'm not interested because I just changed jobs. But here are a couple of women that I'll recommend, and reach out to them. Or men, or there's a couple of people I work with across the organization, but it's somebody who really sees you value.
Don't worry, keep going. It's your sponsor actually giving you a bit of advice on the QT.
But the way thing is that if you're not in the room and people are being discussed, who stands up for you and says that person, that we should invest in this person, we should think about how do we push their career forward within the organization or outside?
Yeah, very good. Suki, what do you think about in terms of sponsors as opposed to mentors? And you said you've got a sort of talent pool and network. Do you obviously in some ways yourself a sponsor of some sort of people, but tell me a bit more about how do you think about sponsors as opposed to mentors?
Yeah, I think the easiest distinction I've heard is a mentor shows you the door, a sponsor opens the door. So for me, it's about the sponsor as being the cheerleader of that sponsee in terms of opening doors, championing their career, introducing them to the right people so you can accelerate their development and promotion within an organization. And again, you're right in the fact that it could be inside or outside the organization. And I'm definitely stealing the over-mentored and under-sponsored. That's definitely going to my next speaking engagement. But I just think it's absolutely...
Good learning, everyone. Take it away. You heard it first here.
It's absolutely true. And I think it's just around having those cheerleaders that are championing your career, because a lot of straight white men do it automatically. When you think of the old schoolboys club, we need to create the new schools of women, racially diverse communities, LGBT+, to support each other. And I think diverse communities are terrible at actually helping each other. They're not as explicit in their support. Like if I think about a straight white guy that might introduce me to someone, they'll just introduce me over email and do it. Normally a woman or someone diverse will check with the person first that it's okay and then introduce me. Yeah. And that's just a very important distinction in the way that different minorities and non-diverse people work.
That's very good. Joelle, I know that you've done quite a lot of work around networks, particularly in the Northwest. Maybe could you sort of describe for us a little bit more about what you've been doing to try and sort of promote networks, addressing some of this mentorship and sponsorship issues?
So I'm a member of the Northwest Business Leadership Team, which has organisations like Siemens, BASF, a number of the big players, United Utilities in the Northwest. And each member, who is the CEO or the principal, has to sponsor a woman 2 levels below, generally him, in the organisation, to be a part of the group that I chair, which is called Rising Stars. And they also have to commit that they will sponsor that woman within their organisation, that they will mentor another woman across company from one of the other organisations. So I mentor, at the moment, a woman from Siemens and previously one from Unilever. We also set up some inspirational speakers, because sometimes it's hearing other women's stories that can be very valuable. And we provide learning opportunities for them. So I suppose that's one example. I think the other thing is, as a woman myself, I kind of railed early on in my career at being part of women's networks. And I've changed on that, because I've realised it's really important that when I go to a dinner, for example, and I'm sitting at a table of 9 men and me, I don't get to know the other women because they're usually scattered around the tables. Whereas if I get to know them, I can sponsor them and I can recommend them. And if someone rings and asks me, I can think, oh yes, I know another woman who I can put forward.
And what practical advice would you give to someone who's listening to this about sort of looking at their own networks today and thinking about what they could do to expand and grow it?
Yeah. So I've actually been challenging myself on the ethnic diversity of my network over the last probably 5 or 6 years. And I realised that I didn't have many personal friends of colour. And I thought, I knew I had at work, I'd got lots of friends, and I sort of thought, actually, I need to build personal relationships. And I've been very purposeful about that. And my life has become so much richer, and I've also understood through conversation and through asking question, I suppose just what they have been experiencing. So yeah,
That's good.
that's what I'd be doing.
And Loren, in Lego Group, sort of, do you do anything specific to try and help with sort of networking within the organisation? What are you doing, particularly around sort of high potential women? How are you helping them to sort of network, develop? What are you sort of what sort of programs and initiatives have you got?
Yeah. Well, it's primarily through the sponsorship effort. So we started at the top of the organization, and that's what I was speaking to before.
Yep.
But that is going to expand across the organization. And at least the way in which we speak about sponsorship, it's about cashing in your own personal equity, your own brand reputation on behalf of a woman. And that's the distinction, at least we make with mentoring. So it's through that initiative that we are trying to give exposure, and then the mentees, or the sponsees in this case, they are a group, a cohort of themselves, and then the cohort of the seniors women leaders are going to then act as female sponsors for the more junior network. So trying to create these different communities.
Very good. I want to just pivot a little bit, and I want to sort of get you to sort of react to, are we at a pivotal moment in time, post-COVID, perhaps with a bit more deglobalization taking place, more ESG, more sustainability, more sense about inclusion and diversity? Are we at a pivotal moment whereby the nature of leadership is changing, and therefore how we promote, let's say, better balance in business needs to shift because of some of these sort of pivotal changes that are taking place? I'm interested in sort of how's the model of leadership evolving and changing? Suki, where would you be on that? Would you be a sort of proponent for pivot, or are we basically continuing on at the moment with sort of an evolution in leadership going forward? And what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's an absolute evolution of leadership qualities that companies are looking for, where it's moving more towards empathy, vulnerability, inclusion, of course,
yeah.
Where it's even thinking about different styles of leadership, from introvert to extrovert. And actually, I think we can say with C&C Group, Vineet, who got the role, the concern about him was, is he maybe too introverted for the board? He didn't maybe present himself as outgoing in comparison to the other candidate. We won't mention the person's name, but so trying to think differently about that, I think, is definitely the step forward. So I'm all about pivoting to what people want, because ultimately the employees further down the career ladder, as I said earlier, are looking up to the leaders of the organisation. So they need to be able to relate to them. They need to be able to want to stay and be committed to the organisation, because there is a war for diverse talent right now. Every company we're working with wants to find diverse talent. So there's things around momentum and speed of which you run through a process as well, without losing that quality. The issue you have with that is that when companies generally aren't that great at succession planning, so when the need does arise, they panic and they want someone yesterday. And so they're like, right, here's a brief for a CFO and we want that filled within a week. And we're like, whoa, it's going to take us at least 3 months to get to like a diverse list. So then trying to be more proactive about where you go and find people mitigates that time to hire.
Right, but again, give people some practical tips, because if you sort of say we want people who are more empathetic, more curious, better communicators, more collaborative, and you're sitting there thinking, I've got some of those skills, but I'm not sure I've got all of them. What do you do about it?
I think I'd tell the candidates to fake it till you make it. Take that risk. A lot of diverse candidates suffer from imposter syndrome. And so I see it with interviews where if you're interviewing, and I know that I am definitely more biased towards, say, diverse candidates. Like, I want them to win the job, and I know that. So I know that when I'm interviewing, I'm probably going to give the straight white guy a tougher time. So to mitigate that in the interviews, we interview in pairs. So you get two perspectives on the candidates, because I know my own biases that I have. But what I find with diverse candidates is that they're the first to tell you what they can't do. And I almost stop the interview, and I'm like, let's start again. Because I know this next guy that's going to come in hasn't even read the prospectus and is going to tell me he's amazing. And I want you to tell me that you're amazing and what you do. And so we try and give them, I think it's giving them the opportunity, because a lot of these roles, there's talent that ordinarily been ignored because we prioritise other demographics.
So Joelle, is there a new narrative that needs to be told about the leadership qualities that we need going forward? Is that something that you're beginning to see? So if it's, how do you sort of explain it? And the traditional model was always, I grew revenues by X, I grew profits by Y, I grew this business by sort of Z. Is there a different and a new narrative that we need to hear? And what would that be? And what would you emphasize in that new narrative?
Well, I think we're seeing a demand for all leaders, you know, men, white men, as well as more diverse talent for breadth. So yes, we need empathy, and yes, we need an ability to manage a P&L. But I think the questions that we're asking are no longer just about, you know, facts and figures. They're also about, and how have you done that, and where have you, I mean, ESG is coming up in all board interviews. Diversity is coming up in all board interviews. Well, it wouldn't have done that 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, we're just seeing the role of the board is changing. Culture wasn't cited as something that boards were responsible previously. We're now concentrating on those sort of questions when we're looking for people.
Yeah, and Loren, we talk quite a lot about culture. How do you sort of define culture from a Lego group perspective in the context of how things are sort of changing? What do we mean when we sort of talk about sort of culture and how it's sort of changing and how it needs to be evolving? And I suppose the clue that I want to give you is, how does that link to the employee value proposition? Because it seems to me that one of the things that underpins all of this is that we're moving to a world where the one-size-fits-all employee value proposition is shifting. Yeah. So how do you balance that sort of performance, culture, employee value proposition? How does that sort of work for you?
Well, I'm going to avoid the question of what culture is. And so that's a danger,
be here for now.
That's a danger zone.
Subject.
But short version is, I think it's about what behaviors actually take place in the organization, to put it simply. But I think I'd rather frame my answer in terms of how to create the culture that's future fit or future ready, that takes into account the criticality of D&I. And the way in which we did it, I mentioned our new leadership model, the leadership playground, and we took an unconventional approach to defining the future leadership culture of the Lego Group. We asked a group of 15 diverse employees, all levels of seniority, male, female, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and they were delegated to answer the question, what leadership do you need as employees to deliver on the future aspirations of the Lego Group? And there's a longer story behind it. But if you want to create a diverse and inclusive culture, it's not going to be designed by a homogeneous group of people at the top. Yeah. They, of course, need to be part of the process, and they need to role model it. But to define it, I don't think that's possible anymore.
And has the employee value proposition changed significantly over the last sort of couple of years? And if so, in what ways?
Well, for us it has, in the sense that we try and create an environment where, as I mentioned before, that everyone has a chance to play a leadership role. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of this could sound like nice jargon. The question is, how does it play out in practice? But that's a huge value proposition, that if you create, to the extent possible, a non-hierarchical organization where each and every employee has the opportunity to speak up, to drive their agenda because of their proximity to data and context that I would never be aware of where I sit in the organization. Obviously in a purposeful environment, I think that is an incredible part of our employee value proposition.
And Milka, how would you articulate your employee value proposition? If Loren's just given us the Lego answer, the Lego sale. How would you articulate it for Pinterest in terms of, as I say, for someone sitting in the middle of your organisation?
I mean, look, I don't know if there's a employee value proposition. Kind of the way we think about it is we really want to make sure that people come in and bring their authentic self, which sounds like a slogan, but do their best work. Again, we are really fully committed to the fact that we will never do what we want to do externally if we don't have our employees happy and committed to what we're trying to do. But one thing I've been observing is, and again, this is one of the things that I've noticed people come to Pinterest quite strongly with, a very strong sense of purpose. But I think that's across the industry. Something has changed for me in the last year. Like, people are asking in interviews way more questions around values, sustainability, what's the company policies on this and that, and I do think we are at the pivotal moment of leadership change, because, and again, another thing I'll mention is, so my team ranges from early 20s to, late 50s. And there is a change. Like, I see the people earlier in their career, they demand different kind of leadership. They demand, what's our stance on this, what's our stance on that. And I really enjoy that, because it is asking for, people are asking themselves this big question is, what is work and what is life? And how do I live a meaningful life now? And how are you going to make sure that you help me with that? And I want not just to have a good work-life balance, but also my work to matter to the world. And I think we need to think about this as leaders, because otherwise we'll just not be able to attract talent. And I think, the old paradigm of what leaders were, that is changing and shifting. And I think, to answer your question, though, it is hard, because, for people who have been leaders for a while, these new requirements are difficult. And I have found it difficult. I have found that my team asking me to be more vulnerable and more open over the last year. And this is, it's risk taking on the personal side. And you gotta go, am I going to be judged when I talk about my children? And but people were asking me these kind of questions. I was like, okay, this is, there's a blend now that's happening now. Now, I think one of the things of pandemic is everybody has seen, I think we've seen each other, children, cats, dogs, fire alarms and all the rest of it. And there is a humanity that has brought in, actually, I think that has helped. But I do think that one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is that leadership development, and what does that look like? And I think it's different from what it used to be. I think there is a need now for really understanding how that leadership evolves, leadership around equity in the organization, why equity, etc. So I do think that there's a more need of a different leadership development.
So two or three dimensions which come up a lot. One is more flexibility. The other one is I want to be valued in the team. And I want to make sure that we're doing sort of things as an organisation which are ethical, which links back to our ESG. We're hearing those sorts of things a lot. How are you encouraging both your line managers and maybe even your sort of people or HR function to actually encompass those dimensions more fully?
That's a big question. I mean, look, again, it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of thought. I think for Pinterest in particular, it's a very values-driven company. So that part is almost like easy, and that's just the way the company makes decisions. One of our real values is we put our consumers first, so we'll sacrifice revenue even if we have to. And I think that's why we attract talent. Probably the area I want to pick up on is the point around flexibility, and I think that's an interesting one. And again, I've been very lucky having been in tech companies. I've had this for progressive companies. We've had this for a while. However, I'm still amazed when I look across the industry at large that there are still companies that don't allow that, and they don't think about that adjustment of time and people doing their best work wherever they want, whenever they want. And I think, but the other thing that's really important here is that's not just for women. Because if you give this only to women or working mothers, they become the minority and the exception. They're starting to be noticed by the others. So how can you create a culture in which flexibility is for everyone and you make sure that people take advantage of it? And I think, again, this is one of the areas where I think role modeling comes in quite handy. So I, for example, talk about how I manage my life very publicly. Again, I don't hide, my calendar is open. I don't hide my time. Like, people know when I'm with my children, when I'm attending the school play, the bake sale, whatever else. I ask my male managers, who also have things that they do, to also talk about it. And again, I don't want people to hide behind that. Flexibility has to be for everybody. Otherwise, the women, the minority, will become reluctant to take advantage of it.
Very good. Suki, Joelle, any sort of particular sort of trends that you're seeing around how you create more sort of flexibility whilst at the same time delivering performance, whilst at the same time trying to enable progression.
Yeah, I mean, if I think of the way the pandemic has changed the way we fundamentally work forever, I think those chairs that, boardroom hiring specifically, those chairs that have embraced it, those ones that are doing more virtual, bite-sized board meetings, meaning they're opening up a global market that could sit in that seat. So it doesn't have to be someone in London. You could actually now look at someone in New York or someone in Asia to accommodate it. They're the ones that I think are getting the advantage when it comes to talent.
Okay.
And I think embracing that change of way of working applies also on the executive side as well, because you're absolutely right, candidates will be far more demanding of clients when it comes to flexibility, for sure.
Okay. Joelle, anything you want to add to that?
No, I was only going to say that my son has just had a child and is taking flexible time, and I'm so proud of him.
All right, very good, very good. Okay, so we're going to try and change the idiom a little bit now. So panel, well done, sort of lots of very good insights. I want to hear from two chief executives now. So I'm hoping that we're going to get Ronan Dunn on the screen. Ronan?
Yes.
Hi, welcome. Great to have you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. We've talked a lot here in London about talent, about how do we develop talent. I know that that's something that you're very passionate about at Verizon there. Could you talk to us a little bit about what are some of the specific initiatives that you're doing in Verizon to particularly promote talent as it relates to gender, inclusion and diversity? And what I'm really hoping that we're able to do is take a few examples from what you're doing and encourage the people in this room and who are listening on the live stream to actually apply it in their own organisations. So maybe just a couple of minutes, give us a few thoughts. What's top of your mind at the moment on the talent agenda?
So look, my context is very much the US market. We're an employer of 130,000 people, and a lot of our employment is at the entry level to the workforce. So one of the things that we do is we significantly invest in education, and so tuition reimbursement right at the core. So the first thing that we address is the people who come into our environment who haven't necessarily had the opportunity to engage in third level education. We provide them that opportunity. So that's a kind of a leveling up type approach that we take. Secondly, we use our technology to support through our Verizon Innovative Learning initiatives actually into the school environment to support a better future talent pool of people who have digital literacy and digital confidence, and teachers have more of the tools and skills they need to improve outcomes for their students. The other thing that we do is we've developed a Verizon Women's Collab program where we're actually looking to elevate and inspire women who left the workforce during the pandemic, supporting gender balance there and creating environments where maybe they have an alternative access to economic activity. And across the piece, this idea of upskilling and reskilling, so as well as tuition reimbursement, a very substantial investment in learning and development. And that allows us to take the pool that might otherwise have a socioeconomic bias in it and try to balance that out in a way that affords us the opportunity to match more talent to opportunity. Because, the fundamental underlying belief is that talent is equally distributed. It's just opportunity that isn't. So we're trying to do some more of that matching right at the core. The other thing that we're trying to make sure is that in an environment where we've seen, the Great Resignation and the fact that there's a she-cession in the US with about 5.4 million net women leaving the workforce, that we're actually creating an environment that means that we're family-friendly, career-friendly, and flexible in the way that we offer employment. And some of this has been forced on us like it has on others, where we have a much more distributed workforce, but we're using the tools of being a technology company and a communications company to not say this as an enforced challenge, but actually it's an enabling opportunity for us to be able to employ people in a broader geographic footprint than would otherwise have been the case, and in a more flexible way. And we can think about that from a diversity and inclusion, but think also from an access and disability point of view, where maybe some of our work didn't lend itself to people who maybe had disability, but by bringing the work to them, we're actually making it more accessible and more available to them. So those are the sort of shape of things that we're trying to do.
So Ronan, could you just describe for us a little bit more, in a little bit more detail, what did you mean by the collab? Because I think that's it would be interesting just to take one of your examples and just sort of articulate a little bit more for us about what was involved in setting up a collab. What sort of size is it? What do you do in the collab? And how does it work in practice?
Sure. So the INSEAD was very much driven from that data point of about 5.4 million jobs lost to women in 2020 amid COVID. And really what it is an intention to help women to essentially re-enter the workforce and realize their career ambitions. So we built a partnership model for the collab, and it offers a library of resources, peer-to-peer support on wearewomencollab.com, which is available and accessible to anyone, free for the user. And it's powered by Degreed. The site provides, hyper-relevant development and training resources from industry experts and others, people like Harvard Business, the Achieve Institute, the Female Quotient, the A Effect, a whole series of partners like that. So essentially, we're trying to bring the tool set that allows people to have both the confidence and the competencies that allow them to re-enter and reimagine their role in the workforce. We have, additional content, live Q&As, workshops, career insights from leading women, a whole series of curated content topics, interactive sessions like that. So it's really building a coalition of capable, willing to create an environment in which people have what they need, women specifically, have what they need to reimagine their re-entry into the workplace.
Very good. And my last question for you is, if you look at talent over the course of the next 12 to 18 months for Verizon, what's your number one priority?
So I think for us is how do we make the new wave of technology, 5G, much more accessible in a way that actually it becomes part of the solution to accelerate the recovery of the economy and the re-engagement, whether it be at the education level or at the work level. We think we can bring opportunity to people in a much more effective way than previously people had to come to and access. So it's technology in the service of the individual rather than the individual in the service of the tech. And I think that's something that the pandemic has created, which I think will change forever, not just the nature of work, but actually the nature of opportunity. And that I think is really exciting.
Thanks very much for sharing those thoughts. And I think that last point around technology is very valuable, because I think that as we look at how technology is going to move forward, it is going to revolutionize, I think, the whole sort of way we think about work, the way we think about education. And we've talked quite a lot here about sort of support mechanisms, and technology clearly sort of plays into that. So thank you. I know that you have limited time. Stay with us for as long as you can. But Ronan, many thanks indeed for joining us. Great to have you from the US in London. So we're very grateful for your time. I also wanted to involve Tiger Tigarajan, who's the Chief Executive of Genpact. And Tiger, you've also sort of thought a lot about the talent agenda, how it's evolving. Again, I'd be very interested in your reflections as a chief executive about how the talent agenda is sort of changing. And if you look at the next sort of 1-2 years, what advice would you have, based on your experiences, for the people in this room about what you're seeing on talent and how it should be moving forward?
Thank you, Mark. And first of all, what a fantastic panel. I almost had to agree with everything that everyone said, which is starting with the punchy targets. So, if I go back 10 years, when I took over as the CEO, we had 0 women on the board. And we had a very clear vision that from the top to the bottom, our diversity on gender would be 50-50. And we were way behind that kind of a goal, but we had that vision. We're still probably some way there, but not there. And I said the easiest thing to do is to change the top, which we did. So we're now 50% NED, women at the top. And we changed the bottom as well. The real problem is the middle. So back to your question, I think the balance in business agenda has only got accelerated through the pandemic. People talk about digital transformation has got compressed from 5 years to 18 months. I think the need for balance in business has just got compressed to now. What do I mean by that? I think the requirements of leadership have dramatically changed to being much more inclusive, much more empathetic. I think all the words that we used. It requires a different leader. It requires a leader who is chosen to be a leader because of heart and mind. And I think in almost every decision, I think we're going to search for, and our employees and talent is going to search for, what's the right thing to do from the heart and from the mind. So data is important. Decisions are going to be based on data. But what is the heart telling you is the right thing to do? The other thing that's clearly changing is the opportunity that it actually provides in this virtual technology-connected world. But if your competitive advantage, which we believe, for example, with 100,000 people in 30 countries, is culture, then how do you maintain the culture that you so admire, that you think your clients love, in an environment where almost 95,000 of the 100,000 people are working from home and are going to continue to work flexibly? Because in our business, you can. And we're going to allow that to happen, but I still want teams to come together to actually engage, to actually be connected, and to learn through apprenticeship. Because for us, apprenticeship is really, really important. And to learn from examples, to have role models. Role models on Zoom are great, but they're only on Zoom. So I think there's a whole bunch of experimentation that's going to happen. I hope we can share those experiments with each other. The more we can all experiment within the organization that we all have and learn from that and then get better and better over time, I think we're going to be better off. And I think very clearly, organizations are going to win based on their ability to attract and retain talent, and others are going to get left behind.
So my question for you is, what are going to be the 1 or 2 experiments that you're going to try in the next 12, 18 months?
So we are already doing a few. So we have about 100 operating centers in 30 countries, and we used to recruit from an ecosystem that could actually commute to that center. For example, in Bucharest, where 4,000 people could commute to our center in Bucharest. We are saying, no, if you're in Lisbon, and if I can create a community of 100 of you in Lisbon to serve the 3 clients, and I'm going to provide you the ability to come together in a WeWork office in Lisbon, X days a month, and you decide as a team how often you want to come together and for what purpose, not as an individual, but as a team, then all of a sudden, the world is the oyster in terms of talent. In fact, I believe the world of campuses is done. I don't understand what campuses are relevant for anymore.
Very, very good. Let me just sort of check in here in London. Is there anyone who's got a burning question that they would like to ask? There's, I can see Charlie Wagstaff, so I'm going to, Charlie, welcome. Ask a question.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a very inspiring event, and lovely to hear all the perspectives. And clearly this is a multi-layered issue that we're dealing with. I just want to ask 2 things which I think might be important to consider in this, and they are menopause and also making demands to suppliers. So can we not ask our suppliers that when they come to us, they're able to represent and be representative of our customers and also representative of diversity which is required? And we're doing that in a number of other areas, and it might be an easy thing to achieve. So those are just 2 areas. I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on that. Thank you.
Very good questions. Let me just check. Was there anybody else who wanted to ask a question? Because we'll take 1 or 2. Yes. Could you just pass the mic back? So keep a log on the questions coming in.
Thank you, David Tosh. I'm very intrigued by the way that you're looking at classifying the kinds of bias that you want to deal with. So we've talked about female, we've talked about ethnic minority. I'm a bit intrigued by the idea of, can you classify by the values that people have got? Because I can well imagine that if we had a very diverse INSEAD community, we might think we're very diverse, but actually we've all got the same values. We've all come from similar kinds of backgrounds, even if they're from extremely different countries. So are you compensating for that kind of bias, and if so, how?
very good. And if we could have the mic up the front, there's one question up the front here.
Thank you. Maybe I will embarrass Mark, but 21 years ago, Mark Spelman hired me on the INSEAD campus to join Accenture. He took a risk on me. 18 months and the risk failed. 18 months later, I left. Now, the reasons why the organization wasn't able to make the most of this risk, we've all talked about. But today I'd like to articulate the question I've thought about for the past 20 years as I've gone on to do other things, is what was my role in this? Me as the diverse candidate, how could I have played it better? And that's something I'd love to hear from all of you.
Very good. We've got one more question here, and then Carol, we've got one on the phone there. So, sorry, we've got two more questions. Right.
Hi.
I'm keeping the list.
My name is Gabi Glesner-Cipollone. I want to thank you. It was a very interesting, very insightful discussion. When it comes to introducing more diversity into organizations, that's a very complex issue, and it is depending very much on the culture. Obviously, it's something that refers to the whole organization. Only then it can be viable and sustainable. However, my question is, does it make sense to a certain extent if it's not able to introduce it on the broad, on the whole organization at once, to start in one area? And the reason I'm asking that is that when you talk to people, for example, about gender diversity, where is it expressed, where is it difficult, they say the lightning bolt these days really is ESG, sustainability within organizations. These teams, by nature, for some reasons, seem to have a lot of women in the teams, and also their importance increases considerably, so they're much more senior executive facing, CEO facing, and also in line with this, the roles within the teams become more and more important, and all the women that have started maybe in junior roles were considered like a playground, now also become more and more important and taken seriously in the organization. So is this something that makes sense to start with as a core in an organization?
Right, we're going to try and answer those questions. I know there was a couple of other ones there. So panel, this is the way we're going to do it. Take a question or take something that's sort of struck, answer it, and then I will keep a check on what we haven't answered, okay? So Loren, I'm going to start with you and pick one of the questions.
I'll take the first one, and all of them are super relevant, but menopause, super critical topic, obviously in the UK now topical as well, and at least in the LEGO group that is now planned for our agenda, proper interventions starting next year for all the obvious reasons. It's one of the last formerly taboo topics that can now be spoken more openly, and we need to create that context globally for, obviously, for all the women in our organization facing that life stage. Then also your second point, super well spotted. We have, as part of our ESG agenda, we call it our Sustainability 2022 plan. We have 7 streams. One of those 7 streams is responsible sourcing, which has traditionally, and many companies have this, which has traditionally been focused on ensuring good labor practices, in factories and so on and so forth. You would all know that. And now that's being evolved to take into account D&I and what are our D&I expectations for our advertising agencies, for our recruitment partners, so on and so forth. So I think that's all coming. And I don't think LEGO Group is unique there, but we're definitely taking both seriously.
Great answers. Joelle, what would you like to pick up on?
I'll pick up on the last question because I can remember that one. So I wouldn't go for concentrating on a functional area. I would go for starting at the board because I think you start at the leadership level. And I think what we've seen happen in gender diversity is too much HR being nice and diverse, marketing being nice and diverse, company secretariat being nice and diverse, but not CEOs, not CFOs. So I think you start at the top and really start working through the succession plan to the top.
Suki, we haven't talked about unconscious bias, so I think that was one of the questions that we, so biases?
it was more about values, though, wasn't it? Classifying values and as a bias. But I actually think it's a really interesting conversation with values, because I don't think you can change someone's values. Someone's values, you are socially conditioned as you grow up. That's how you create your unconscious biases, and that's where you get your values. What you can regulate and change are people's behaviors. So when an organization has all these values, words put all over the wall, what underpins the behaviors that you expect from the leaders and the employees in the business? That's what I think is more important, rather than the values themselves.
Good. Milka, is there anything you want to add to any of those questions?
I think I wanted to pick up the question on the verse on the...
In other words, why I blew it.
No, but I think the question was what
the answer 21 years ago is probably different than the answer today.
No, because look, I think it's a good question, and in some way, me as a woman, I've been so often in the minority, and and I do think it's a good question. And what I would say is, it starts with awareness, self-awareness of, do you know your own limitations and your own biases, very often towards ourselves. And actually, I saw this really interesting, speaking of biases, I saw this really interesting statistic the other day that 91% of men have a bias towards women, but 86% of women have bias towards women. So very often we bias ourselves towards the minority that we come from. And so understanding that, working in a way on your own self-awareness, asking for help and support from the organization, the leadership team, etc., is for me the way to approach that. But I don't think we can avoid our own biases towards ourselves.
That's good. And I'll just make one observation. I think one of the things I learned from actually sort of recruiting at INSEAD for probably about 25 years was actually it was genuinely about how to find a really good fit between the skills and capabilities of individuals and what the organisation was looking for. And in one sense, my view was always that sort of it was part of my responsibility to try to work out how you present, if you like, almost like a mirror, to help people to sort of say, how well do you fit with this particular type of organisation? And I think one of the sort of responsibilities of leadership increasingly is to provide that mirror so people can look at it and say, how do I fit with that particular organisation? And probably I didn't do a good enough job 20 odd years ago. Hopefully I could do it a slightly bit better now. We're nearly out of time, but I just wanted, there was one question, I think, in the middle there. Was it? Yes, please. Just.
I was just interested in social mobility. We haven't really talked about that, and where you've got candidates that perhaps not that spit and polish, how you go about ensuring that you're looking at them and giving them the opportunity.
That's the unusual career path routes, I think. And Carol, was there anything on the feed that we should just pick up on?
Yeah, there's one question that stood out, which actually builds a lot on Helen's comment about taking risk, and the means about how do you then actually support that individual. And it just observes that diverse candidates in generally can suffer, and they're had, but they're not helped to be part of the organisation where they landed. And are there any good practices in corporates to help people who are different work their way in? And are there some companies that you're aware of who are more tolerant of differences than others?
Risk, tolerance, social mobility.
I want to take the social mobility one.
Go.
I'm very passionate about this topic for a few reasons. One, I'm originally Bulgarian. I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for INSEAD. But it's not easy. And I think both at Microsoft and now at Pinterest, we do a lot of work around that. And I think the question is, how do you go? I personally think that you have to do a lot of work with entry level. And finding people from a different background that you normally would. I think there was a conversation here around apprenticeship. I think that's a really important one. Working with organizations and again, educating, sometimes even, I have gone into secondary schools to talk about potential careers, etc. But that again requires a lot of thought, investment in resource in terms of how you hire them and how do you bring them into the organization, because it can be a real challenge when you bring them in. How do you make sure that they're successful? Because the type of management that they require, the type of onboarding, the type of training they require is very different from the normally skilled people. But honestly, one of the highlights of my personal career was at Microsoft. We had an apprentice who at 20 years old, she got a full-time job. I mean, she was after 2 years being an apprentice, she came in at 18, it was phenomenal. And like just seeing somebody succeed has been great. But again, I think it's something that the company has to take as a priority. But to me, it starts at the entry level very often.
Very good.
Can I just continue on that? Because also I'm thinking social mobility from an exec and board level is starting to get more of a conversation with CEOs and chairs, because overwhelmingly we already know that the majority of board directors and chairs and CEOs are privately educated and went to a Russell Group university or an Ivy League college. I'm a working class boy from Derby, so people don't normally believe that because they think I'm really posh and I'm really not. And actually, I'm already very different when I suppose when I used to walk into the boardroom. Now it's just a little tile on a Zoom or a Teams. So I think the challenge with social mobility is, first of all, defining what social mobility is, and trying to capture that data is a challenge in itself, because there are differentials in the way that it's defined. But from my perspective, when we're interviewing, if the candidate's willing to, we will ask them about where they grew up. We will ask them what their parents did. So to get a sense of actually this, because when people talk about hiring gender or racially diverse candidates, if they all went to Oxford University and privately educated, you're not really getting that much difference around the table. Yep. So it does bring a richness to the experience in their profile when you're presenting that candidate. So for us, it's always really, and it was always part of our candidate interview when we're talking for exec or board level roles. So I think I'm really pleased you raised it, because it's a really important issue.
Very good. Joelle, is there anything you want to add to that? Anything?
No, it certainly is something that's coming up a lot, and I think if you're looking at racially diverse talent, you're often also looking at more socially diverse talent, and which is another reason for it being so important.
Very good.
But it is an issue.
Hold a sec, Mike. Mike, is there a mic around? Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
You're supposed to have 2 mics.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you. It is an issue at board level, getting socially mobile candidates, because the reward for being a non-executive director is not that high in financial terms. So to get the younger talent, the socially mobile talent, it's not attractive enough to them, because they're still building their careers, building their wealth, and so it's how do we do that? And there are some good schemes around in terms of apprentice schemes for boards, shadowing boards, and so on, and we need to do much, much more than that. But it is taking a long, hard look at how we reward at that level if we really want to attract the right talent in.
Okay, that's very helpful. So I'm afraid we've just about come to the end of our discussion. So I said right up front that I want one takeaway that you are going to go away from tonight and really think about how to apply it either to self or to your organisation. So to help you with that, I'm going to ask each of the panellists to sort of highlight one thing from tonight which has really struck you, which you think everybody should sort of take away and think very carefully about. Loren, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I would just call out what I started with, which is the senior women in leadership sponsorship, that the executive team and the board should be sponsoring up-and-coming female talent.
Okay, sponsorship. Joelle?
I would be highlighting those 2 key roles of CEO and CFO and the pipeline to that. So if in your succession plan you haven't got women, then what are you doing to fill it?
Yep, succession. Suki?
Mine would be, how are you holding your organisation or company accountable for accelerating diversity and inclusion? Be it punchy targets or reporting annually what you're actually doing to tackle, say, gender inclusion or racial inclusion. As an employee leader, you have a right to demand more from your employers.
Good. Accountability. Milka?
I'm actually going to steal something from Suki, which is diversity is about widening the gate, not lowering the bar.
You can steal that one.
So, yes, I will. But I will quote you. But I will quote you. So how can we widen the gate even further?
Good. And I think that I'd like you to sort of think a little bit about how you can be bolder, take a few more sort of risks in this particular space, either personal risks or risks on individuals in your organisation. How can you be bolder? How can you take those risks? And I wanted you to sort of go away thinking we are at a very interesting pivotal point at the moment in terms of where we are as we transition out of COVID, as you look at and listen to what's going on in COP26. Just think about where we are, and this is an era where I think talent is going to be right at the top of the agendas over the course of the next 2 years. We know that we're going to be long on certain skills, short on other ones. It's going to be a real talent battleground. And if we're not bold, if we're not really sort of stepping out, if we're not taking a few risks, I think that we're actually failing in some ways on our organisations. And so with that thought, I'm going to hand you to Carol to wind us up. Carol.
Wow. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, the panel, for such an engaging and lively debate. Actually, I think I might as well throw these notes away now, actually, after all of that. I'm delighted to have been asked to say a few words of thank you tonight. So firstly, thank you very, very much to the panel, to our guests in the room, and of course our virtual audience, hosted by V Together, for such a lively and interesting debate. I'd like to also thank EMS Events here, who have actually managed to pull off this hybrid event for us by working together with V Together and also bringing in from the US, Ronan, on Zoom. Kudos. Thank you, Florence, for being the driving force behind this series of events, and the INSEAD UK Alumni Association, and in particular Katie Arcutty, for all the support that she's given us behind the scenes. You just would not, I mean, I was absolutely amazed by how much effort and detail goes into organising, particularly a hybrid events like this, which I think is actually the first at INSEAD. As well as Nermeen, our new president, for being here in person today and to support us. A big thank you to all of our mentors. You heard a little bit from Florence earlier about our mentoring program, and to all of our sponsors, but they're just too numerous to mention by name, so I'm not going to do an Oscar speech of long lists of people, but you know who you all are, and there are quite a few in the room tonight. As Florence said in her introduction, it's more than 50 years now since the first women were admitted to INSEAD, and yet female CEOs and chairs are still a rarity. So gender balancing is both a global challenge, and again, as was said earlier, it's consistently proven to increase value and profit for business. It is a business imperative. And it's actually one of the UN's SDGs. It's a global challenge. So our goal is to inspire and support current and future female leaders to become the next generation of, and really importantly, as Joelle said, the CEOs, the chairs, the CFOs, the exec committee members. And if anything you have heard today has resonated and you'd like to support this initiative, whether that be by volunteering your time, by endorsing the initiative, or by making a financial donation, for those people out there in the V Together world, you can check out the donation box. For everyone else in the room here, if you'd like to speak to anybody afterwards with one of the Balance in Business badges on afterwards, there's also a little bowl at the back to put your business card in, and we'll get in contact with you afterwards and see what maybe you can do to help. I don't know if anybody has seen Frozen 2. There's the most, I like to keep things simple, and there's the most wonderful song in there, and it's called Do the Next Right Thing. So my message today would be to do the next right thing, step by step. The time for calling for action is well past. We do need to act, and we need to act on the call. Thank you. You'll be pleased to hear that drinks and canapes will now be served at the back of the room. Thank you very much. Thank you.